Chicago. 6 a.m. The cheap alarm clock blared, shattering the silence of the small apartment in the city's suburbs. Scarlett Hayes slowly opened her eyes and for a brief moment, stared at the peeling ceiling above her. All around, the cramped and simple space seemed to scream what she had always known. This was never where she belonged. With a deep sigh, she got up and walked over to the cracked mirror in the corner of the room. Even with messy hair and a sleepy face, it was impossible to ignore what the reflection revealed. A rare, almost hypnotic beauty. Scarlett gave a faint smirk, not out of vanity, but because she knew it was her greatest asset. If the world values appearances, then that's exactly how I'll open every door, she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra she lived by every day. As she got ready for another day of college classes, the contrast between her simple clothes and her confident gaze was almost ironic. Scarlett didn't need luxury to radiate power. It was in her stride, the arch of her eyebrows, and most of all, in the way she made anyone feel like they were standing before someone destined for something greater. Leaving the building, she passed neighbors who barely acknowledged her. He didn't care. For Scarlett, every second in that neighborhood was a reminder of where she never wanted to be again. On campus, the scene changed entirely. Among modern buildings and students dressed in expensive brands, Scarlett walked as if she owned the place, even knowing she was only there thanks to a scholarship. It was in the main hallway that her eyes landed on Emily Turner, blonde, delicate, dressed in discreet designer clothes, sitting in her wheelchair, smiling warmly at everyone around her. Emily was Scarlett's complete opposite, kind, naive, and surrounded by true friends. But somehow that unlikely friendship worked, at least for Scarlett. "Emily, darling," Scarlett said, approaching with her calculated smile. "Ready for another boring economics lecture? Or are you going to convince me to skip it for one of those fancy cafes you love so much?" Emily laughed, not noticing the subtle irony hidden in her friend's words. "You know I'll always choose a good coffee over a class, but today we've got that special lecture. My dad's one of the sponsors, remember?" Scarlett hadn't forgotten. Quite the opposite. That was exactly why she was there. Flawless, even in simple clothes. Where there was influence, money, and power, Scarlett made sure to be present. As they walked together toward the auditorium, Scarlett's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. It wouldn't just be students there. Businessmen, renowned doctors, and members of Chicago's elite would be attending that event. And that's where her game began. She gently squeezed Emily's arm as if in gratitude for the friendship, but deep down she knew. Emily Turner was the key to unlocking the world that had always been out of her reach. And Scarlett was more than ready to turn that key. The university auditorium, specially decorated for the occasion, looked like a piece of the world Scarlett had always dreamed of conquering. Elegant chandeliers, discreet waiters serving imported coffee, and a select crowd dressed in more than expensive clothes. They wore power. Scarlett walked in beside Emily, who was immediately greeted by businessmen, professors, and influential figures. After all, being a Turner in Chicago meant having a last name that opened any door. Something Scarlett understood well, even if she wasn't born with that privilege. "Scarlett, come with me. I want to introduce you to Dr. Carter, one of today's speakers. He's amazing," Emily said excitedly, maneuvering her wheelchair with ease through the crowd. Scarlett hid a satisfied smile. She hadn't met Daniel Carter in person yet, but she had heard of him. A renowned plastic surgeon, young for the prestige he carried, known both for his talent and his ethical, reserved demeanor. He was exactly the kind of man Scarlett knew she could conquer and use. When Emily stopped in front of a small group, Scarlett saw for the first time the man who, unknowingly, would become the lead in her next move. Daniel Carter was even more impressive in person. Tall, elegant, with that effortless charm. He was conversing with other doctors, but his eyes immediately shifted to Emily, and then to Scarlett. "Dr. Carter, this is my best friend, Scarlett Hayes," Emily said in her usual sweet tone. Daniel extended his hand politely, but was caught off guard by Scarlett's steady gaze. It wasn't the typical enchanted look he was used to. It was the look of someone who didn't ask for permission to be noticed. "A pleasure, Doctor," Scarlett said, shaking his hand with just the right balance of delicacy and confidence. "I've heard a lot about you, but I must admit in person you're even more interesting." Daniel raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback, not out of arrogance, but by the subtle boldness of a young woman who seemed to belong there as much as anyone else. The conversation remained cordial, but Scarlett had already planted the seed. She knew exactly when she had captured a man's attention, especially one used to being admired but rarely challenged. Hours later, while Daniel spoke about medical ethics and aesthetics during his lecture, Scarlett barely listened. Her thoughts were elsewhere, analyzing his every move, every expression, memorizing what could be used to her advantage. At the end of the event, Emily chatted excitedly about the connections she had made, but Scarlett remained silent, calculating. That night, lying in her simple bed, Scarlett stared at the ceiling as she always did. But this time the smile on her face was different. It wasn't just ambition. It was certainty. "Dr. Carter, you will be mine," she murmured confidently. Because for Scarlett Hayes, the game didn't start when she walked in. The game started when she decided to play. The days following the event were ordinary for anyone, except Scarlett Hayes. In her mind, every detail was part of a bigger plan. And the next step was simple: make Daniel Carter believe fate kept crossing their paths. Scarlett never believed in coincidences, but she knew how to use them better than anyone. On Friday afternoon she discovered, after hours of social media research and subtle conversations with Emily, Daniel's favorite cafe. A sophisticated yet discreet spot in downtown Chicago. Frequented by few, it was the perfect setting for the kind of encounter Scarlett had in mind. Wearing an outfit elegant enough to draw attention but subtle enough not to seem forced, Scarlett walked into the cafe with a book in hand. Not that she intended to read, but she needed to look casual. And there he was. Daniel Carter, seated at his usual table, reviewing documents while sipping his black coffee. Scarlett took a deep breath and, with the ease of an award-winning actress, walked to the counter, feigning surprise as she noticed him. "Dr. Carter?" she called out with a tone of fake surprise, as if she had just recognized him. Daniel looked up and smiled, genuinely friendly. "Scarlett, what a pleasant coincidence." She let out a soft laugh, tilting her head slightly. "Chicago feels smaller than it looks, doesn't it?" Daniel, ever the gentleman, invited her to sit. And of course Scarlett accepted, as if it were a spontaneous gesture and not exactly what she had planned all along. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Scarlett knew exactly how to steer it. Smart enough to impress him, mysterious enough to keep him intrigued. She spoke about her studies, her career ambitions, carefully leaving out her true intentions. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed increasingly captivated by this young woman who didn't fit the shallow mold he was so used to encountering. When the afternoon came to an end, Daniel offered her a ride. Scarlett declined with a charming smile. "I like to walk. It helps me think," she said, giving him one last memorable look before saying goodbye. As he walked away, Scarlett felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew she had just planted another seed. In the days that followed, more accidental meetings took place. At the same cafe, in the university library where Daniel occasionally gave lectures, and even at charity events where Emily, unknowingly, served as the perfect bridge for these encounters. Emily, always cheerful, would comment, "You and Dr. Carter get along so well. Who would have thought, huh?" Scarlett would simply smile, hiding her satisfaction as she watched her plan unfold perfectly. But deep down she knew, Daniel was already hooked. Not entirely, not yet ready to fall completely, but enough to ensure he wouldn't forget the name Scarlett Hayes anytime soon. And for her, this was just the beginning. Because in the game Scarlett played, the secret wasn't chasing after anyone. It was making them come to her, believing it was their own choice. Winter had begun to show its face in Chicago, with cold winds slicing through the streets. But inside the sophisticated restaurant where Scarlett found herself that night, the atmosphere was different. Warm, inviting, wrapped in discreet luxury. She sat across from Daniel Carter at a dinner that, this time, wasn't the result of a coincidence. He had officially invited her. And that invitation was all the confirmation Scarlett needed. He had fallen for her. For weeks, she had played her cards masterfully, never too distant to seem uninterested, never too available to become predictable. Now, sitting there with a glass of wine in hand and Daniel's gaze fixed on her, Scarlett tasted victory, but also something she hadn't planned for. When Daniel smiled sincerely and spoke about how much he admired her intelligence and worldview, Scarlett noticed something she had always tried to avoid. He wasn't just drawn to her beauty. Daniel saw her as a potential partner, someone he could share more than fleeting moments with. And that's when the first whisper of doubt crept into her mind. Am I starting to feel something real? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on her lifelong mantra. Emotions weaken, power strengthens. But that night, as they said goodbye at her building's doorstep, Daniel gently held her hand and asked, "Scarlett, everything between us feels so natural. I'd like to see you more often. Not just by chance." His touch was soft, his gaze sincere. For the first time in a long while, Scarlett felt her heart race, and not because of strategy. She smiled, this time without overthinking it. "I'd like that too, Daniel." Their first kiss happened right there. No audience, no manipulation, no apparent ulterior motives. Just two completely different worlds colliding. That night, lying in her bed, Scarlett stared at the ceiling like she always did. But unlike all the other times, it wasn't ambition consuming her thoughts. It was Daniel. And that irritated her. "I can't lose myself in this kind of feeling. Not now," she thought, trying to regain control over her emotions. Meanwhile, across the city, Emily Turner was living her own fairy tale. She was enchanted by a new co-worker, a young businessman named Nathan Collins, polite, kind, but carrying a past Emily knew nothing about. Scarlett patiently listened to Emily's stories, pretending genuine interest, while internally analyzing every detail. "I'm so happy for you, Emily," Scarlett said with a smile that hid 1,000 thoughts. "Just be careful. Sometimes people aren't exactly who they appear to be." Emily, innocent as ever, simply laughed. Little did she know that those words applied more to Scarlett than anyone else. Because deep down, Scarlett was beginning to realize that no matter how hard she tried to stay in control, the heart had its own rules. And playing with emotions was a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The relationship with Daniel Carter quickly became the center of attention within Chicago's most exclusive social circles. It wasn't every day that the city's most respected doctor showed up hand in hand with a young woman, unknown, without a prestigious last name, without pedigree. Scarlett, as elegant as ever, walked beside him at events, dinners, and charity galas. On the outside, she looked like she had achieved exactly what she wanted. But inside, she felt the growing pressure of an environment where every smile was fake and every compliment laced with poison. The elite wives, used to keeping their positions untouchable, whispered in the shadows. "Where do you think she came from? No one knows anything about her family. Is Dr. Carter really that blind?" Scarlett heard it all, pretended not to care, but she knew the game was getting more dangerous. When you rise too fast, everyone wants to watch you fall. Daniel, deeply in love, ignored the gossip. But he wasn't naive. Slowly, he began to notice little things about Scarlett that didn't match the perfect image she portrayed. Evasive answers about her past, a certain coldness in moments that called for genuine emotion, and that constant feeling that she was always one step ahead, calculating everything. On a rainy night, after a charity event, Daniel finally asked, "Scarlett, why do I feel like you never really talk about yourself? I want to know who you are beyond all this charm." Scarlett, picking up her glass of wine, looked away for a moment. It was rare for her to be confronted like that. "Some stories from the past aren't worth telling, Daniel. I prefer to focus on the future," she replied with that same smile that always disarmed any suspicion. But this time, Daniel didn't seem entirely convinced. Meanwhile, Emily Turner, unaware of the storm brewing, continued to trust her friend blindly. But Scarlett, pressured by social threats, began using Emily's confidential information to protect herself. Small comments about the Turner family fortune and her father's business accidentally slipped into conversations with the right people. Scarlett knew that by keeping herself useful to the powerful, she could buy time, and maybe even allies. Yet every time she did it, a pang of discomfort hit her. Emily was the only person who truly saw her as a friend. But in Scarlett's world, emotions had always been tools. And now friendship was becoming just another currency. The suspicious glances, the dwindling invitations, and Daniel's subtle distance showed that the masks were starting to crack. That night, Scarlett looked at herself in the mirror, alone in her now luxurious apartment, paid for by gifts and perks of her new status. For a moment, the confident woman she always saw reflected back at her seemed different. There was a shadow there. The doubt of someone starting to realize that maybe the price of reaching the top was higher than she ever imagined. But as always, she whispered to herself, "Weakness is not an option." And with that she put back on the mask society expected to see. Because even when the masks fell, Scarlett Hayes knew how to create a new one. The invitation was on the table, an offer she couldn't refuse. Scarlett had just left a meeting with one of Chicago's most influential businessmen, Richard Davenport, a corporate shark and an old acquaintance of the Turner family. He saw in Scarlett not just a beautiful woman but a sharp mind, and more importantly, someone willing to do whatever it took. "You've got talent, girl. And I know how to spot someone who knows how to play the game. I want you by my side in the company's new expansion. But of course, certain alliances will need to be reconsidered," he said, giving her a look that needed no explanation. Accepting that offer meant rising to a level of power Scarlett had never even dreamed of. But it also meant distancing herself from Daniel, who was already uneasy with the dark world Scarlett was stepping into. That same night, Daniel confronted her again, this time with no sugarcoating. "Scarlett, look at what you're getting into. Davenport doesn't approach people for their talent. He buys them. And you're selling yourself." His words cut like a knife. For the first time Scarlett felt anger, not because she was being accused but because Daniel truly cared. "You think I've come this far just to give up now? I wasn't born to be just Dr. Carter's girlfriend. I'm going to build my own empire," she snapped, her eyes shining more with pride than love. Daniel shook his head, disappointed. He was starting to realize that the woman he fell in love with was made of pure ambition, and that maybe there was no room for him in the future she was chasing. Meanwhile, Emily, still unaware of the chaos, accidentally discovered that confidential information about her family was circulating among investors. Information that could only have come from someone very close. Confused and hurt, she went to Scarlett. "Tell me it wasn't you," Emily said, her voice trembling, looking at her friend like she was searching for an impossible explanation. For a brief moment, Scarlett felt the weight of guilt. But years of survival had taught her that admitting weakness was the first step to losing everything. "Emily, I did what I had to do. You don't understand how this world works. I protected you more than I betrayed you." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek as she realized that the person she trusted most was the one pulling the rug out from under her. "You don't have to be like this, Scarlett. Not with someone who truly loves you." But Scarlett was already too hardened to listen. The break happened right there, silent, devastating, and irreversible. That night, Scarlett signed the contract with Davenport. She had made her choice. Not love. Not friendship. She chose power. But as she set the pen down on the paper, she felt a strange emptiness. For the first time, victory tasted bitter. Because deep down she knew. The higher she climbed, the lonelier it became. The luxurious halls that once applauded Scarlett now watched her with suspicion and whispered malice. What was once admiration had turned into cutting remarks. And as she knew all too well, the elite was quick to lift you up, but even quicker to tear you down. The contract with Davenport had given her status and money, but it also exposed her to the darkest side of business. She found herself entangled in shady deals, financial manipulations, and worse, scandals that began to tarnish her name. It was during one of those meetings that Scarlett received the news. Emily Turner had exposed her publicly. Hurt by her friend's betrayal and pressured by her family, Emily decided to reveal to the press and investors the entire web of manipulations Scarlett had spun, from using privileged information to climbing the social ladder at the expense of others. The headlines screamed her name: Scarlett Hayes, the rise and fraud of Chicago's new socialite. That same day, Daniel showed up at her door for the last time. He no longer carried a look of disappointment. Now it was pure disgust. "I tried to show you another path, but you chose the worst one," he said, tossing a dossier onto the table, evidence he had gathered himself. Illegal contracts, suspicious transactions, all tied to Davenport and by extension to Scarlett. "You came here to destroy me too, Daniel?" she asked, trying to maintain her proud stance, but feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet. "No, Scarlett. You did that all by yourself," he replied before turning his back, this time for good. Alone in her apartment, now just a symbol of an empire on the verge of collapse, Scarlett stared at the chaos around her. Endless phone calls, lawyers scrambling to contain the damage, Davenport washing his hands of her and discarding her like a pawn. Emily, though heartbroken, knew she had done the right thing. She was no longer the naive girl who believed in blind friendship. Now she was a woman who had learned the hard way that even love could be weaponized. Scarlett, on the other hand, felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Weakness. The power she had chased so relentlessly had become a prison. She had no allies, no love, and worse, no one to blame but herself. That night, looking out the window at the city that once seemed full of opportunity but now bared its teeth, Scarlett finally understood what her mother used to say back in their days of poverty. What comes easy, the wind will carry away. But in Scarlett's case, it wasn't the wind. It was the weight of her own choices. And she knew, the worst was yet to come. The silence was deafening. Scarlett Hayes sat in the middle of her luxurious penthouse, surrounded by everything she once dreamed of: sophisticated furniture, designer clothes, sparkling jewelry. But in that moment it all felt worthless. The calls had stopped. The invitations disappeared. And the people who once fawned over her now avoided even speaking her name. Her social downfall was swift and brutal. The stocks tied to Davenport's scandal plummeted, and with them, all the prestige Scarlett had built through so much effort and manipulation. She still had money, of course. Enough to live comfortably for years. But no one had ever told her that the true price of ambition wasn't financial. It was emotional. Daniel moved on with his life. Rumors said he'd been promoted to director of one of the country's top clinics. Emily, after exposing the scandal, rose as a public figure, praised for her courage in standing up to corruption, becoming a symbol of integrity. And Scarlett? She was nothing more than a bitter memory, the story of a meteoric rise followed by an inevitable fall. On a cold morning, as she looked out over Chicago through the massive glass window, Scarlett asked herself, was it worth it? She had everything, and yet nothing at all. Old messages from Emily still lingered on her phone. Photos of genuine moments, real smiles before ambition's poison tainted everything. For the first time, tears rolled down Scarlett's face, and she didn't try to stop them. There was no one left to impress. No more games to play. It was just her, and the weight of her conscience. 4 days she avoided leaving the apartment. But the suffocating loneliness, as heavy as the empty luxury around her, began to consume her. Until, in an unexpected act, Scarlett stepped outside. No makeup, no designer clothes, no masks. She wandered through the streets of Chicago, instinctively finding her way back to the neighborhood where she grew up. Every corner brought back memories of who she was before deciding that beauty would be her only weapon. And there, among simple faces and real lives, she realized something she had never seen before. True worth wasn't about climbing higher. It was about knowing who you are when everything falls apart. Yes, Scarlett had reached the top, but it was a summit she had built alone, and now it was time to come down. Not out of defeat but by choice. Because there was something worse than falling. It was realizing you'd been climbing the wrong ladder all along. When Scarlett thought she had already lost everything, life made sure to show her there was always more to lose. What once seemed like a contained corporate scandal escalated to national headlines. A federal investigation uncovered schemes of corruption and money laundering involving Davenport. And of course, Scarlett Hayes' name was everywhere as an accomplice. Bank accounts were frozen. Assets seized. Lawyers vanished as quickly as the fake friends had. In a matter of days, Scarlett watched her empire crumble. No jewels left, no designer clothes, no penthouse overlooking Chicago. Just a few suitcases and the crushing weight of being the face of a public fraud. She tried reaching out to Daniel, but he had already changed his number. She thought about contacting Emily, but knew that chapter was closed. Alone, humiliated, and with no prospects, Scarlett found herself back where she started, but this time without the innocence of someone dreaming about the top. Now she carried scars that not even time could heal. With no money, no home, no reputation, she returned to her mother's house in the humble neighborhood where she was raised. The same door, the same smell of simple coffee, the same woman who always told her, "Sweetheart, character is worth more than any jewel." Scarlett didn't answer. She simply hugged her mother for the first time in years. A sincere embrace without pride, without masks. For the first time she allowed herself to be fragile. The weeks that followed were filled with silence and reflection. Walking through streets she once despised, Scarlett finally saw what she had never wanted to see. People living with little but with dignity. Genuine smiles despite the hardships. She realized that while she was busy trying to become someone in the elite world, she had become no one to herself. The news about Davenport continued, But Scarlett was no longer the center of attention. Another scandal had emerged, as it always does. The world moved on, and she was left behind, forgotten. But in that oblivion, something appeared that she had never known before: peace. For the first time, Scarlett didn't need to impress anyone. She didn't need to play the game. And in that emptiness, a different kind of seed was planted. Because sometimes, you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. And Scarlett was about to find a new purpose. One that wasn't about climbing, but about being reborn. Months passed since Scarlett Hayes vanished from the social columns. To the world, she was just another forgotten name, buried by her own mistakes. But to herself, Scarlett was only beginning to understand who she really was. Far from the spotlight, the parties, and the power games, she found something she had never sought before: meaning. One ordinary afternoon, walking through the neighborhood where she grew up, she saw a group of young girls, with the same look she once had. A mix of ambition, fear, and the feeling that the world offers no chances to those born on the wrong side of the city. Scarlett stopped. She watched them for minutes, and for the first time she felt she could use her story, not to manipulate, but to inspire. Determined, she began attending local community projects. At first, she was met with suspicion. After all, her name still carried the weight of scandal. But Scarlett wasn't there to explain herself. She was there to act. Over time, she created a program focused on young women in vulnerable situations, teaching them about financial literacy, self-esteem, and most importantly, about the traps of a world that sells success at any cost. Scarlett used her own life as an example of what not to do. No masks, no embellishments. Just the raw truth of someone who had reached the top, and found nothing there but loneliness. News of her initiative began to spread, not in gossip columns, but in serious reports highlighting her transformation. One day, while organizing a workshop for the girls, Scarlett received an unexpected visitor. Emily Turner. She walked into the room with that same sweet smile, but now more mature, stronger. "I heard about what you're doing, and I thought it was time to see it for myself." Scarlett felt her heart tighten. She wasn't expecting forgiveness nor reconciliation. But after a few seconds of silence, Emily said, "People change when they truly want to." The two exchanged a look that spoke louder than words. It wasn't the restart of a friendship. It was an acknowledgement that the past was right where it belonged. Days later, while preparing materials for the next session, Scarlett found herself standing before an old mirror in the community center. She paused, looked at herself. No jewelry, no designer clothes, no makeup. The woman reflected back at her was nothing like the one who once faced the world years ago. There was less superficial shine, but far more inner light. Scarlett smiled. Not the calculated smile of before, but a genuine one. She finally understood that beauty had always been her weapon. But now it was her essence that made the difference. As she stepped out for another workshop, she saw the young girls waiting for her, their eyes filled with hope. And in that moment, Scarlett knew she didn't need to climb anymore, because she had found the summit within herself. And that's how Scarlett Hayes, the woman who lost everything, discovered that the greatest power anyone can have is the power to reinvent yourself.